If you think a quiet street can't hide a storm, listen to this night. The porch light burns steady on a neat lacrosse block. A father pulled to the curb, late but smiling, ready to thank the teenager who had watched his child so he and his wife could step out. He walked up to the door and knocked. No answer. He tried again, harder. Still nothing. Inside, a radio murmured. A lamp glowed in the front room. The house looked lived in, not empty. He circled the siding, calling the babysitter's name. The October air felt sharp. Somewhere, a dog barked once and went quiet. He tried the doors. Locked. He peered through a window and saw a small blanket on the couch and an open textbook on the armrest. No movement. He called the family's line from the porch. The phone rang and rang behind the glass. His hands began to shake. He went to the back, found a way in, and stepped into a room that felt raw the second the latch lifted. The quiet was not normal. It was heavy. A chair lay tipped on its side, a cushion was skewed, a shoe sat by itself under the coffee table, as if someone had started to put it on and stopped. The radio's low voice scratched through static like a heartbeat. He called for the girl again. He said her name out loud this time, like a plea. Upstairs, the child slept, untouched by the noise a house makes when something breaks. He found the phone on the floor. He found a pair of eyeglasses bent at the hinge. He found a smear on a sill that should have been clean. He reached for the light switch with a hand that didn't feel like his and dialed the operator with the other. By the time the first patrol car rolled up, the porch light looked colder than before. The officer took one step over the threshold and stopped. He had been in houses where anger lived and in houses where fear did. This felt like fear. He called for backup, moved carefully, and let his flashlight paint the story the room wouldn't say out loud. A struggle that had started fast and ended faster. A path that led not to the front door, but away from it. Neighbors drifted to their windows. A woman in a robe pointed shakily toward the side yard. Another man said he had noticed nothing at all. The officer stepped into the dark and saw small signs in the grass that only showed themselves if you keep your light low. In the soil near the foundation, a print. On the paint of a basement window, prime marks. On the wood, the rough edge of a tool. The officer crouched and stared at the ground where the prints grew fainter and fainter and then vanished at the curb as if the night itself had swallowed them whole. More lights arrived, more officers. A detective marked the spots with small paper tints and took photographs the way you do when you know you'll need to look again and again. They checked every room, every closet, every corner where a scared person might hide. They found nothing. The child upstairs slept on. The house held its breath. Word crossed the city faster than the patrol cars could drive it. Volunteers gathered, students, neighbors, strangers who could not sleep. They spread out with flashlights and clipboards calling the girl's name into hedges and ditches and the dark edges of tidy lawns. The October sky went from ink to ash and back to ink again. Somewhere between the calls and the sirens, someone noticed what no one had seen on the first pass. Behind the house, leaning under that pried open window, stood a ladder that didn't belong to the family. It was angled just so, its feet pressed into the earth, its rungs damp with dew, set there by hands that knew exactly what they were doing. And when the detective put his palm on the side rail, he realized the worst part. It had been carried there from another yard. Someone had planned their way in and planned their way out.
They fenced the yard with rope tags and paper. The ladder stood like a question no one could answer. Dew clung to its rungs, dark grass deep at the feet. Someone had set it carefully, climbed once, and not come back for it. The detective touched the wood and felt how cold it was. He told an officer to canvass the block for anyone missing a ladder. He already guessed the answer. Searchers moved in lines, college kids in jackets, neighbors with thermoses. The father walked with them until a sergeant asked him gently to sit. He couldn't. He paced the curb, hands in his pockets, eyes on the window Evelyn should have been looking out of right now. Every few minutes he checked his watch, as if time itself had an answer he'd missed. A woman down the street said her ladder was gone from beside the garage. She hadn't noticed until the officer asked. She didn't think much of it. People borrowed tools in this neighborhood and brought 'em back. The officer nodded. Not this time. He asked when she had last seen it. She frowned. Maybe yesterday morning, maybe the night before. He wrote it down. It moved the timeline an inch back and made it worse. Bloodhounds arrived near noon. Their handlers kept voices low. The dogs nosed the ground under the window and pulled hard toward the side yard, then the alley, then the street. For half a block they were sure. Then the scent rose, thinned, and vanished at the curb. A car. The detective stared at the road as if tread could hold a memory. Leads came fast and strange, like rain in windstorm. Someone thought they saw a girl in the blue coat near the highway. Someone else mentioned a rattling sedan, idling without light. A third person swore a man had been knocking on back doors the previous week, asking for work. None of it was solid. All of it kept the phones ringing and the officers knowing. They set up roadblocks. They searched ditches. They opened empty barns and stared at the cold dust inside. Inside the house, another team worked slow. They mapped scuffs and moved nothing without a photograph. The living room told them she hadn't planned to vanish. The textbook opened to a chapter she didn't like. The radio tuned to a station she did. A glass on the end table still beaded with water. On the steel, a smear that tested his blood but said nothing else. On the floor by the phone, a small bent hinge from those glasses, like a punctuation at the end of the fight. A neighbor 2 houses over stood at her fence and watched the tents go up. She looked tired in the way people look when their memory is arguing with itself. When a young officer asked if she heard anything, she said no. When the detective himself asked hours later, she hesitated. "I heard a cry," she said finally. "One sharp sound. I told myself it was a cat." She wiped at her eyes and said, "I told myself it wasn't my business." The detective didn't scold her. He just wrote the time carefully and said, "Thank you." By sunset, the search spread to the ridge. Flashlights stitched the ground. A boy from the college cried out. He'd found a scrap of fabric snagged on a hedge. It was small and pale and could have been anything. The detective bagged it anyway. Nearby, a print half filled with leaves made a messy oval. A heel, a hurried turn, then nothing. False leads nipped at real ones. A call came in about a ransom note taped to a phone pole. It turned out to be a crumple flyer. Another call claimed a sighting miles away. The timeline didn't fit. The detective kept everything on a board, lines connecting names and places until the pattern looked like a web. The center stayed empty. He went back to the ladder. He bent close to the side rail and saw a thin, greasy smear like the mark a thumb leaves when it meets a tool. He thought of the prime marks on the basement window. Deep, steady, not panicked. He thought of how the dogs had lost the trail at the curb. Whoever did this had come prepared. Whoever did this had leapt prepared. Then a new voice entered the case. A young man in a varsity jacket, eyes red from the night search, asked to speak in private. He said he'd walked home past this block a week ago. He said he saw a car he didn't recognize parked without lights near the alley. He didn't call it in. He didn't think it mattered, except he said, swallowing hard, I saw it again tonight when they set up the roadblock. Sinew dent on the rear bumper. Same missing hubcap. The detective's pen stopped. Are you sure? The young man nodded and pointed down the street toward the corner where the last checkpoint glowed in the dark. That car, he said softly, is parked right now. Patrol lights washed the block in a cold blue.